Okay, so speaking of that, that's where we're kind of start picking it up today. Okay, so let's move forward here. Now, I'm going to go back real quick. Sorry, I don't want you to get dizzy looking at the slides flip. But if you look at that slide that's on the screen there, we say, okay, so what are some of those influences? Well, the first word there is philosophers. All right. Well, we have to keep in mind that the delegates at the Constitutional Convention were educated, which means in those days they might have gone to some basic college level. I mean, they would have taken some schooling, probably schooled by their parents. That was probably instilled by their family, read a lot of books that were at least available at the time, and maybe went to some level of college. There was Harvard, and there were a few, King's College, and I think Penn University. There were a few, not many. And they would have read the philosophers of the day, the people who were thinking about stuff and writing stuff. And most of those people were from Europe. And again, in this case, specifically England. Okay? And two philosophers that were sort of well known at the time but had different viewpoints were two guys, one named Thomas Hobbes and the other named John Locke. Okay? And they had different interpretations about what government should be all about, how government should sort of work, and what is the point of government. Okay? Now, Thomas Hobbes here on the right, these are just basic viewpoints, trying to break it down as much as possible. They wrote a ton about this stuff that we aren't going to get into. But Hobbes, his basic viewpoint was that people are essentially cruel, greedy, selfish. And Locke thought, actually, people are more reasonable. They're more moral. They want to work together with others. They want peace, let's say. They want sort of the good to come out and come through. So they had a different belief about something we call the social contract, and I think this is a question in your notes. When you see that phrase, social contract, all we're talking about is the agreement. It's not necessarily been written down, but the basic agreement between a government and its citizens. Say, so like, what is the point of government? Okay, but the agreement between government and citizens. So Hobbes, based on the way he sort of thought about people, thought, you know what, we need a strong government that says, hey, the government, whoever that is, maybe it's a monarch, like a king or queen, they're going to determine what kind of rights people have, and that's how it is. And as citizens, you fall in line. You follow the rules. You don't argue about it. You just, because in exchange for following the rules, you have a strong government, keeps you safe from foreign invaders or foreign threats, and just kind of keeps society moving. Locke, much different. Thought, wait, no. That government gets its power from people, and people get its power, or their rights rather, from God. We talked about this a lot, or not a lot, but quite a bit earlier about the rights of Englishmen. These rights that are kind of you're born with, they're God-given. We might be thinking about freedom of speech, freedom of economic opportunity, freedom to worship or practice a religion in any way you want. But those aren't things that government gives people. Yes, and I'm going to get to this in a second, but these are things that you just are born with, and therefore you inherently get, and government allows you to keep practicing those. They didn't say you get them or not. Government's there to make sure you keep getting those rights. And Hobbes would have a different view. The other right that we're going to kind of try to stress today is the right to keep your own property. The right to, the government can't take your property away, whether that's your land, your house, your other valuable things that you might have. So just going on here, so this kind of already said this, but Hobbes would think, and it's maybe a little hard to read, that peace exists. A society is only going to be peaceful if there's a very strong ruler like a king. Otherwise, if there's not, people are going to be killing each other and there's wars and stuff like that because people, he thinks, are cruel. Locke thought, I'm over here on the right now, he thought, you know what, actually people are pretty good, so people are mainly going to be peaceful with each other. And he would probably have thought it's these strong rulers who want power who are going to end up taking their countries to war. Otherwise, generally speaking, people are peaceful. Okay? And I mentioned this already. So, here again, Hobbes thinks people create government that's powerful in exchange for law and order, in exchange for like society to just be sort of orderly so there won't be any fighting amongst people. And again, Locke thinks, you're born with these natural rights. Those are way more important than some strong government. And so it makes sense then that Hobbes would want a absolute monarchy. That means a strong king, a strong ruler, one person, and everyone falls in line. That'd be his preferred method. And of course, Locke, John Locke, would want a stronger self-government, stronger rights, people to have more power over their personal responsibilities and their personal lives. Yeah, I think that says power shouldn't be. What's that? Oh yeah. Okay. So those are these two philosophers that these, again, the reason we're talking about this is because these delegates are thinking about these two views. Now, there weren't any delegates that totally believed one way or the other. Well, now let's watch the video. Maybe we'll answer that as we go. So let's watch this quick video. You guys that on? Yeah. I guess that's not done. Okay, here we go. So those of you watching at home, you'll just have to click on this video. It's on slide, I don't have the number of the slide, but it's on the Hobbes and Locke video. So. Next slide is the pair deck. And then there's a pair deck after that, but you won't be able to do that watching this at home. What? I mean, these guys are getting bored. I gotta entertain them somehow to get there. Oh, Dado?
Blatantly stole that from Mrs. Dawson, by the way. We blatantly stole this from Mrs. Dawson.
She's a good teacher, Miss Dawson.
You got the spell? Okay, we don't have to worry about that part.
All right. So I think coming up here is another pair deck question. I'm going to get back to that. So, all right, so who seems to have a more optimistic outlook on humanity? In other words, who believes people are basically good? Is it Thomas Hobbes, he's the guy on the left, or John Locke? Who really sort of seems to have a more shiny outlook on history going forward, or the future going forward, and on society? Who do you think? This is your pair deck opportunity here. So this is when you move your little circle, star, rather. Who do you think? Who's got a better outlook on things? Okay. Yeah. Looks like most of you are moving in the right direction. Yeah. I think we could easily say that that's Locke's belief.
After a couple of quotes in there.
Yeah, so here, actually if I look up here. So, quote, Locke says, and you guys might not be able to read this, I'll read it for you. All mankind, being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. So, that's Locke. Hobbes, you gotta assume he has a frown on his face and he's grouchy. Continual fear and danger of violent death in the life of man is solitary. Poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Okay? So, you know, yeah, just to get you guys feeling good about life. So Thomas Hobbes thought because of that, because people are going to kill each other, basically, you need to have a strong ruler. All right? Now, like I was saying earlier, some of these delegates, they had a little Hobbesian in them. Now, they might not have been as dark as Hobbes, but they did believe that, you know, if there wasn't strong rule, real strong rule, that people would turn to chaos and violence and stuff like that. All right. So now we're going to move into a little bit of the history of English law, or English history and influence. Sorry.
So one of the things that we've talked about is that the founding fathers.
going to move over to Mr. Ginther, who's taken over the rest of our lecture today. So
here's the problem with that.
here he is.
Their history.
I know you'd rather watch me, but
So this history has kind of between the crown and this thing called the Parliament has kind of shifted a little bit. And so, what the founding fathers see is the power being reduced more and more by the crown and given more to Parliament, which has become kind of representative of the people. Now, it's not completely there yet by the time that we're talking about here in the 1780s, but it's really close. And so a lot of what they're going to do is they're going to try to model their government to meet a Parliament which they view as going in the right direction, as representing the people. So I'm going to give you a quick history on Parliament so you can see what I'm saying here, and you know what I mean. So here we have a scale, kind of, okay? And on the right-hand side we see the monarchy, and on the left-hand side we see Parliament. Now, Parliament today, this is like a representative of what it's like today. Parliament's got, when we just compare the monarchy and Parliament, Parliament's got all the power, all right? So Parliament, they have all of the power right now, and really the monarchy is basically just a figurehead government. They don't have any political power. They have influences, but not anything official, okay? But that's not how it always used to be. If we go back, and let's go back to about 1200 or so, let's go back about 800 years, and we see that really the monarchy had all. Can you go up one slide, Mr. Fair? Or back one slide? There you go. Monarchy really had all the power, and Parliament didn't have any. Well, this obviously shifted, sometime in history, and really, it kind of was a gradual shift. We're talking about 800 years here, but I'm going to pull out three different pieces in history that really kind of started that shift in power between Parliament and monarchy. All right, the first one would be the Magna Carta. And this happens way back in 1215. Matter of fact, if anybody really points to the roots of a democratic government, they're going to point to the Magna Carta. Real basically, what happens? King John. It's been tradition that the king will get money and soldiers, sometimes even some land from the barons, the local barons, and in return, the king will protect those local barons. And it's like kind of a symbiotic relationship. Each one gives up a little something, but they get something in return. Well, it turns out that King John was asking a little too much from at least what the barons thought was fair. And they ended up, long story short here, they end up kidnapping King John, and they take him to this place called Runnymede. And they forced King John to sign this document, this Magna Carta. And what this Magna Carta does is a couple of different things. It established this advisory council called Parliament. And then it also, places certain requirements on the king as well. After he got done, King John really didn't adhere to a lot of the Magna Carta. But you know what? That was the first kind of crack in this absolute power that the monarch had. Now, even though it's ever so slight, the common man, the barons, okay, they have a little bit more power, okay. So we're going to start to see the scale start to move a little bit, okay. So monarch still super powerful at this time. Parliament, just a little bit more power. We move on to our next piece. That would be the Barons' War, and I don't want to get too far into what actually happened during the Barons' War. But basically, there was this noble. His name was Simon de Montfort, and he was once a very loyal knight to or soldier for the crown. Matter of fact, he fought alongside Henry VIII, but at some point there was a falling out, and the nobles, organized by Simon Montfort, end up going against the king, and the Simon Montfort ends up defeating Henry VIII just right around 1265, and for a very small period of time there, Henry Montfort actually ruled England. However, very quickly, Henry VIII gets power back, and Montfort and all of Montfort's conspirators end up dead. Okay, so but what happens here is now there's now Parliament, this advisory council to the king, is given even more power, and with this new style of Parliament, it's now become open to elections for some of the nobles. So here we go. We have just another small step towards what we see as a democracy. And you can kind of, again, see the scale shifting a little bit more. All right, the next major stop we're going to make in English history is in 1688. And so in essence what happens here, King James, and we'll talk about the Glorious Revolution a little bit later and its impact on American law. But pretty much what happens here is that King James II is the king of England. King James II is a Catholic, though. And there were a number of Protestants who didn't want a Catholic to be the king, because whatever religion the king is, that's the national religion, and the Protestants didn't like that. And so they orchestrated this kind of coup. They called King James's daughter, Mary, and her husband, William of Orange, to basically overthrow James II. So William lands on the shores of Great Britain with his army. James II is kind of betrayed by certain members of his own family and by certain soldiers, and he ends up just leaving. He's like, you know what, I'm just going to take off. I'm going to go. Okay, so it's actually the Glorious Revolution, and it's a bloodless revolution. That's why it's called the Glorious Revolution, because nobody actually died. James II was just banished, and then William and Mary ended up taking over control of England. Okay, so again, this is going to be a situation where the balance between Parliament and the monarchy, Parliament gets a little bit more power, because they start living under this concept of a social contract, which Mr. Farron talked about before. This social contract, this agreement between the ruler and the people being ruled, that this ruler's they're gonna give some of their power to the ruler so that the government can run smoothly. And with the new formation or the new look at the Parliament now becomes more a ruling body made up and made for the people. So here we go. Here's another step towards democracy. And our founding fathers know all of this, okay? And they recognize this. So they're not necessarily looking to go back, because one of the things they have to figure out is who's going to rule us? Who's going to run us? What is the executive going to be? Is the executive going to be a king? Are we going to install a king and kind of that monarchical system? And based on their history, based on how far the monarch and the Parliament had come in English history, that was one of the things they decided against pretty quickly. So what did they exactly agree on? Well, first of all, they had to kind of scrap the Articles of Confederation, and one of the reasons they had to do that was because the very essence of the Articles of Confederation creates this weak federal government, which we just got done talking about, which it couldn't exist under. Secondly, they couldn't really change the Articles of Confederation because there was one state that didn't show up to the Constitutional Convention. Mr. Fair?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island does not show up. And according to the Articles of Confederation, to make any changes, you needed 13 out of 13 states to agree to those changes. Rhode Island's not there. They can't make any changes. All right. So we're just going to take the Articles of Confederation, throw those guys away. The second thing they agreed on is to have some kind of constitutional government. That is, a government that's run by a constitution, a system of laws, an agreement really between the people being governed and the governing body itself. Something with a constitution. They're going to also need a strong national government. And here's the thing. They need to also protect the rights, and I talked about this earlier. they need to be able to protect the rights of their citizens, which is a fundamental job of the government. But, and here's the tricky part, they can't give too much power to the government where the government could use that to take away people's rights. Okay, so that's why you see I got the little balancing act there. So here we go. We got to make sure that we give enough power to the government so they can protect people's rights, yet not too much power that they can somehow usurp those rights or take those rights away. All right. The other problem, when we get to the Bill of Rights, which is going to be much later here, that's all we're going to be talking about basically is how much power should the government have in this situation as opposed to how much freedom do people have in this situation. They also they also agreed on elected officials, and they also agreed on this concept of separation of powers. And this is something they got actually from the Romans. The Romans had this kind of elaborate government, a tiered government with, different branches, and those branches would each have power over every other branch. And that's really what our government works on right now. It's a three-branch government. We have the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. And each one of those branches has some kind of power over the other ones. And we'll get more into that when we start talking about the Constitution. We'll give you concrete examples of that as we move. All right, so we're going to show you kind of a brief recap of what I just talked about here. Just go ahead and play it. I'll tell you when to stop. 2:35. I might get through the conflicts. How many videos do we have? $35, right? I'm going to try to get to 35 today. Alright, right now we are watching a 2-minute 35-second video on slide 22. Slide 22. For the most part. Now it's the Northwest Ordinance apparently. Oh, good. All right. So let's look at those rules that were made. So going into the Constitutional Convention, we're gonna talk about three major conflicts that existed here. Okay, and the three major conflicts existed between, well, one group was the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. Now, Federalists, they want a strong national government, okay, and that makes sense, okay. They want a strong federal government, federalist, okay, proponent of a federal government. The anti-federalists were kind of leery of that strong national government, and so they really liked having the power in the hands of the states, or it's at least as much power as they possibly can in the hands of the states. And really, you know what, we're going to be talking about this Federalist versus anti-federalist thing, and it's going to take different forms, but we're going to be talking about it for the next, what, Mr. Fair, like 90 years? Well, not 90 years of our history here, of our, class history. So it's going to come up quite a bit here. The other conflict existed between the small states and the big states, and when we talk about that, we're talking about population, and the southern states and the northern states. All right, so let's take a look at conflict number one. Oh, and of course, whenever we have a conflict, 9 times out of 10, it is an issue over money. And that's what this issue is over. It's over tariffs. Now, just so you know what a tariff is. A tariff is an import tax. Okay, it's taxing somebody's products or another country's products coming into the country. Okay, so that's what this whole issue is really revolving around. Now, shortly after the Revolutionary War, before the Revolutionary War actually, the South had this very nice trading partnership with Europe, especially with England. Okay, and that would make sense. There were colonies, and we talked about that before. But now, after the war, the South wants to maintain this good economic trade relationship. They're making money, England's making money, they're all happy and everything. Except the North says, hey, wait a minute, we have, manufactured goods much like England does. We want to trade with the South. We want to trade with you guys. I mean, after all, we're the same country. Why should you be trading with England when we're right here? And your economic health and our economic health are tied together. Stop thinking like 13 different states and start thinking like one country. Okay? That's what the North says. The South is like, we got a good thing going here with Europe, with England, and I don't know if I want to necessarily rock the boat. And also, to compound matters a little bit, the North wants to actually institute what are called protective tariffs. Next slide there, Mr. Fair. The North wants to institute what are called protective tariffs on English goods coming in. So, I don't know, let's take like wagon wheels, okay? Let's say the North wants to ship wagon wheels to the South, and England is also shipping wagon wheels to the South. Well, if they're both selling their wagon wheels at, let's say, $2 a wheel, okay, and and England is getting a 50-cent tariff placed on their wagon wheels. That means every wagon wheel coming in is getting a 50-cent tax placed on it. Well, now that means they have to increase their price by 50 cents. Okay, so now, the North can still sell their wagon wheels for $2, but now England's got to sell their wagon wheels for $2.50. So this is not new. This has been, you can look at protective tariffs, and it's totally legal. All different kinds of countries do this, especially nowadays. But here, the South is like, wait a minute. If you put this, if the North, if you guys, as a country, we put this protective tariff on goods coming in from England, then, Mr. Fair, that's okay. Then, guess what's going to happen to our goods? England is going to tax our goods going into their country, and we're going to sell less. So the South is like, whoa, this is not going to work. That's going to hurt our economy. So we can't necessarily do that. So here the South says, well, this is really, this whole taxing, this whole tariff thing, this is really a matter for the states. Every state should be able to control their own import tariffs. And that's a very anti-federalist way to look at it, because they want that power to remain with the states. The North, on the other hand, says, we think that the federal government should actually, control those trades. And that's a federalist way of thinking about it. They're thinking about the federal government having power to control these tariffs. Whew. All right. So here is, in a nutshell, go back one slide there, Mr. Fair. Here is, in a nutshell, what the conflict is all about here. the South, the anti-federalists, okay, for the most part, anti-federalists, feel that tariffs are a matter for the state government. The state government. The North, the federalists feel that deciding on tariffs is a matter for the federal government. But wait, hang on. There's another aspect to this. If you go ahead and you take a look at this 1790 census chart, what do you notice about that? Where is most of the population located? Well, I'll tell you, most of the population is located in the North. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, if the federal government controls trade and most of the population is in the North, that means who would control trade? That's right. Thanks for all the answers in the chat. The North would. So there's the North saying, hey, this should be a federal issue, but the South is saying, well, yeah, you want it to be a federal issue because we won't have any say in this. Huh. So, follow this here. The North has a larger population, which means the North will have more representation in federal government, which means the North will have more power in the federal government, which means the North would be able to control the trade. Huh. Like Mr. Fair said, unless somehow, some way, the South can find a way to increase their population. So, how can the South do that? I don't know. But here's the thing: the tariff issue, that issue I just talked about, was taxes and the tariffs, that can't be sorted out until we figure out representation. Okay? So, real quick with representation, and this leads into conflict number 2. This is a small state versus big state issue. There's 2 different plans floated out there. What kind of representation? Do we want everybody to have, like under the Articles of Confederation, like the same amount of power, big states and small states having the same amount of power, or do we want representation based on population, which is called proportional representation? So there were 2 plans floated out there. One was kind of like the Articles of Confederation, that New Jersey plan. It said there'd be one House of Congress, everybody would get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 representatives, whatever it is, but it would be the same number of representatives. New Jersey, the same as Virginia. All right? And then on the other hand, you have what's called the Virginia plan. Now, the Virginia plan calls for a 2-house Congress, or bicameral legislature. And they say that the representation should be placed on, or should be based on, population, which means proportional representation. All right. We will come back and we will talk more because, like I said, we still got another conflict and everything is all tied together. All right? Mr. Fair, you got anything? I don't have time to review the questions, so.